Today, we are diving deep into the history of one of the world's most sacred and, let's be honest, most contested cities. We're going to unpack the story of how Jerusalem became holy to Islam, and let me tell you, it's a story that's way more about power, politics, and some incredible architecture than you probably imagine.
So that gets you thinking, right? How does any place become sacred? Does holiness just, appear out of thin air? Is it some ancient memory? Or is it something that's actually built, piece by piece, for reasons that have as much to do with what's happening on Earth as they do with the heavens?
Now, the story many of us know is beautiful and profound. It centers on the Prophet Muhammad's miraculous night journey, the Isra wa Miraj, to what the Quran calls the farthest mosque. And that event, for sure, is the spiritual foundation for Jerusalem's holiness in Islam. But what if I told you that the physical, monumental holiness of Jerusalem, the actual buildings that we see today, was forged not just in a moment of pure piety, but in the fire of a brutal civil war, a war that almost tore the brand new Islamic empire apart?
To get what's going on, we have to rewind the clock to the late 7th century, to a massive conflict called the Second Fitna. Now, this wasn't just some political disagreement. This was an all-out existential crisis for the rulers of the day, the Umayyad dynasty, the first ever dynasty to rule the entire Islamic world.
Okay, so you've got two main guys in the ring. Over in Damascus, you have the Caliph, Abd al-Malik. He's the head of the empire, but his power is being seriously challenged by a rebel leader, Ibn al-Zubayr. And Ibn al-Zubayr has a really strong claim to power. And, this is the important part, he controls the holy cities of Mecca and Medina.
And controlling Mecca, that gave Ibn al-Zubayr a huge advantage because it meant he controlled the Hajj, the annual pilgrimage. Of course, the Hajj is a sacred pillar of Islam, but back then it was also something else. It was a massive political tool.
Think of it like this. Every year, thousands of pilgrims from all over the empire, including from the caliph's own territories in Syria, had to travel to Mecca. But when they got there, whose turf were they on? Ibn al-Zubayr's. The Hajj basically became this huge annual public endorsement of the rebel leader, and for the caliph in Damascus, this was an absolute disaster.
So what do you do when your biggest rival controls the absolute center of your religious world? Well, you build a new one. Or, at the very least, you elevate another city to that same level. And that's when Abd al-Malik turns his gaze to a city he did control, Jerusalem.
And get this, the timing here is just, you can't make it up. The construction of one of the most famous buildings on Earth, the Dome of the Rock, lines up perfectly with the Civil War. It starts just after the war kicks off, and it's finished the very same year the war finally ends.
So you have to ask, right? Is this just a crazy coincidence, or was this an absolutely brilliant act of political statecraft? A strategic move in a war for the very soul of the empire? Well, all the evidence points to the latter.
And the building itself practically screams its purpose. First off, it's not actually a mosque for people to gather and pray in. It's a martyrium, a monument built over a sacred rock. Its design, this grand octagon, was meant to go head-to-head with the big, impressive Christian churches in the area. And inside, you've got these stunning mosaics with Quranic inscriptions that are basically a direct message to Christians, challenging their theology and declaring the power of the Umayyad Caliph. This thing was a statement piece.
Okay, so you're the Caliph. You've just built this jaw-dropping, politically loaded monument. Now what? It's just sitting there, this giant physical fact. It needs a story, a sacred story, to really lock in its meaning. Historians have a name for this: retrospective sacralization. Let's break it down. First, the guy in charge builds something huge. Second, that building is so impressive, people need a deep religious reason for why it's there. So third, you take stories and traditions people already know and you beef them up, add new details that point directly to this new spot. And boom, the building and the story become one, and a new layer of holiness is created forever. And it turns out the perfect story was already there, waiting. In the 17th chapter of the Quran, it describes the Prophet's journey from the sacred mosque in Mecca to the farthest mosque, in Arabic, Masjid al-Aqsa. But, and this is the key part, the Quran doesn't actually say, hey, the farthest mosque isn't in Jerusalem. For a while, early Muslims debated where it was. That definitive connection? It was made through later interpretations and traditions that just so happened to boom right when the Umayyads were pouring money and power into Jerusalem. So the story of the night journey gets bigger, more detailed, and guess what the new details include? The Prophet not just visiting Jerusalem, but landing on the exact rock that Abd-al-Malik just happened to build his spectacular dome over, the very spot from which he ascended to heaven. It was the perfect fit. The political building now had the ultimate theological seal of approval.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. This all sounds a little cynical, right? But this isn't some one-off thing unique to Jerusalem. It's a pattern you see all through human history, where power uses architecture and storytelling to literally build sacred memory.
Think about it. The Roman emperors, they built temples left and right to show everyone they had the gods on their side. Fast forward a few centuries, Emperor Constantine becomes a Christian. What does he do? He goes to Jerusalem and builds the massive Church of the Holy Sepulchre to announce that the Roman Empire is now the protector of the Christian faith. So what Abd-al-Malik was doing? He was playing from a very, very old playbook.
The great historian Oleg Grabar, who spent his whole life studying the Dome of the Rock, just nailed it. He said that for these rulers, quote, to separate its religious and political dimensions was to misunderstand both. For them, you couldn't untangle politics from piety. They were the same thing.
So what's the big idea here? What's the takeaway? It's that sanctity isn't always something that's just there, waiting to be discovered. A lot of the time, it's made, it's constructed on purpose through incredible acts of power and storytelling. And what starts as a political project can absolutely become a real, deeply felt sacred experience for millions of people.
And that kind of leaves us with one last question to chew on, doesn't it? When we look at the great sacred sites all around the world today, the cathedrals, the temples, the shrines, how many of them also got their start as an argument about power, long before they became a touchstone of pure faith?